Okay. All righty. There are a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. And then we'll get into the stuff right here. And one of this most recent round of, or this most recent project, a lot of people haven't turned their project in yet. If anybody's having any issues or anything, let me know right away. I can help you as you move forward and going into your project. Also, if you have submitted projects and you aren't getting the points that you want or you think you deserve, first thing to do is look at the notes that I've left, see and read why I'm saying things, because sometimes it's as silly as not alphabetizing the citations. You lose a few points for that. Or another thing is, there's been a couple people who have turned in the slides for their PowerPoint, but instead of the video of their PowerPoint presentation. And so they just need to go back and send in the right file. And sometimes it's as ridiculous as my system won't recognize HEIC files. And so you need to just send in a JPEG or something. And if it's problematic or if it's confusing, tell me, and to ask me the questions that you have or whatever like that. I'll do my best to answer them and clarify them. And one thing I did find out is that I was grading. There is a 5-page essay you're supposed to do, and the fifth page is where the citations are. And I remembered it as being 5 pages with another page being citations. So I downgraded people's points. And everybody who did the 5-page essay, look at what I said and just let me know. Because if you didn't get points because the citations are off and stuff like that, that's one thing. But if it's because you did everything you were supposed to, and I'm telling you need to write more, contact me, because sometimes that is true. There have been a couple people that it looks like they were setting up a slide deck for a PowerPoint presentation and turned that in as an essay, and it's not going to work as the essay. So yeah, just look at the grades and stuff like that. Turn those things in. And for the people that have done the projects already but haven't sent to the discussion, remember to send it to the discussion. Now, do you guys that are here, do you have any questions about the first or second project or any of that?
I think I'm all right, actually.
All right, good. What did you do your project on?
I have not done it yet, but I just because of so many personal things going so wrong in my life. But I'm planning on turning it in tomorrow.
Oh, okay. What is it on?
I have not actually decided fully yet. I'm thinking I'm gonna do it. I want to do it on this guy we talked about last week, Albrecht Dürer. I really liked his
Well,
work.
Albert Dürer, yes.
Yeah, I loved his work with the wood carvings.
He is absolutely astounding. He is amazing. Very much a product of the late Renaissance, early Baroque. And there is a lot in common, believe it or not, between him and Carl Jung's Red Book that Carl Jung wrote. If you're familiar with Carl Jung, part of his psychoanalysis was kind of confronting your own inner issues and dealing with them. And he talks about transformation, but Carl Jung saw himself as an alchemist as well. And that's what Albrecht Dürer very much was. He was an artist who really leaned on alchemist uh, imagery. So yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was so interesting. I thought the detail work, the connections to the printing press in the future were just it was so interesting. It was so incredible to talk about.
Yeah, and our paper money today owes a lot of its life to the fact that it's alive to what Albert Dürer did. What's that? 400, 500 years ago. So for good or ill.
Yeah, exactly.
but so does the Ouija board. So that's something to think about. Oh, today we're going to be kind of slowing down a little bit, and just because I want to really drive home this idea that so many things are interconnected. And from an art history perspective, from an art history scholarship, unless you can find specific links that definitely connect things in the real world, all we can do is talk about this looks very similar. This looks really interesting. This looks very similar. And the reason for that is in art history scholarship, you need to be able to validate and verify your claims through uh, the chain of what's it called? In I don't know if any of you guys are do in forensics or anything like that, but there is a chain of custody. That's what it is. You have to find a chain of custody to validate your claims of connection. And as regular students, we don't have that burden of proof on us, so we can talk about how stuff is connected. And I'm going to make some observations that I'm not showing you what the chain of custody for the validation is to verify the things I'm talking about, but it is interesting to me that I get this from friends of mine that work at the King's School of Traditional Arts in Wales, and my friends at the University of Religions and Denominations, and the Islamic School of Art in Iran. So I'm getting these from legitimate people, and friends of mine that had me write a book with them on Isfahan architecture in Iran, and so these are all valid. I just don't have the chain of custody spelled out on this. So um, I'm not going to ask you to take it on faith, but I will say that if you guys want to look for it, there is a very strong chain of custody to verify the things that I'm talking about. Now, this painting is that I'm going to show you is really important for a number of reasons. And this painting right here, I'm going to show you a big version in just a bit. This painting was done right at the tail end of the Renaissance. And the stuff that's going on at this time of the world, we have Italy has a lot of ports. It became really important to Mediterranean trade early on because it has a lot of ports. Ports are important because they are areas where the water is deep enough that heavy laden ships can get right up, snuggle close to shore, and you can offload and reload them quickly. That's what makes a port important. And Italy, if you just look at a map of Italy, you can see that there's a lot of these little inlets and little isthmuses and different things like that poking out. There's a lot of portside towns. But the other thing Italy has for it is they are sheltered from the rest of Europe by those mountains right to their north. So if you want an easy route for your trade goods, uh, Italy seems to make a lot of sense because, and for people, because they do have all these ports. You can offload and unload people and goods quickly and easily, both for Mediterranean travel as well as looping around uh, Europe, going to some of the major port rivers like the Danube or the Danube, different things like that. It's also really good for scooting over to Greece and kind of sneaking into the Black Sea and doing a lot of transoceanic trade. So it's positioned really well. Now the Crusades was a time between 1096 and about 1300, where the the papacy and the leadership of the Catholic Church, which had their roots very firmly in Italy, where they were constantly trying to find ways of getting access to specifically Northeast Africa and the Middle East through the Holy Land. Uh, different religions had a lot to do with different regions of trade. And trade is a principal lifeblood for any culture, any civilization. Although before this period, we did have King Charles, or Chucky the Great. His French name was Charlemagne. He was the Holy Roman Empire emperor, and he was responsible for really holding most of Europe together. He and his descendants for quite a long time. After that fell, the Crusades are kind of what held Europe together. And this is where these cultures that we're going to talk about come together, the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the Europeans, because they found out a lot about each other during the Crusades. Christians would go into Christian Turkey, and that's where they would get all saddled up and ready to go to crusade. They would drive north or drive south down to the Holy Lands and Northern Africa. This is also because Turkey or Istanbul is right on the Bosporus. Uh, this is a major route connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and it became it for actually for thousands of years. This area was the main go-to place for people trying to get goods from North Africa and Europe into China and further east, and for people coming from further east like China and also India, which is a little bit west, going trying to get them or trying to find their connections for trade and stuff to Europe. And of course, India is where we have the Mughals. Turkey is where we have the Ottomans. But these are things that emerge at about the same time that the Renaissance is getting its foothold in Italy and the rest of Europe. So, the Crusades end right around 1300. There's a generation or so where people are kind of struggling with how do we shift from a wartime economy to something that's more long term. And this is from about 1300 to 1375. This is where the Italian families, it really dawns on them that they can make crap tons of money connecting with like the Ottomans and the Mughals, these other groups of people, the Middle Easterners, the Arabs, the North Africans. And they still want everybody to believe that they're in the ascendancy, that they're the supreme muckety mucks, but they want to make relatively peaceful connections. And that's where this painting comes in. What kind of architecture do you see in these round arches here?
I see pretty similar to the stuff we were talking last week, where it's just you see I mean, the Roman stuff, not last week. That was a
Yeah,
few
yeah,
years ago. Mhm.
yeah, exactly. And we did see a little bit of that last week because it influenced the Ottomans heavily. But this never existed. This painting is um, uh, Paul preaching in Alexandria. I'm sorry, Saint Mark preaching in Alexandria. What's important about this is a couple things. According to several religious traditions, Saint Mark was martyred in Alexandria, and that's where his body was hidden away. Now, the bodies of important people are always going to be really important to other people that want everybody to associate them with the important people. This is one of the reasons why during World War II, actually from the mid 1930s on, uh, there were many clandestine groups that were against the Nazis that kept hiding Charlemagne's body. They went to his crypt, they took his body out, and kept moving it around the countryside so the Nazis were never able to find it. That's a little known part of history. Everybody knows that Hitler, with the Tool Society, was trying to find all these artifacts. He was also trying to find the Holy Roman Empire emperor, King Charlemagne, and that's an interesting story in and of itself. But Saint Mark the families in Italy that had a big political interest in the Catholic Church wanted to be able to say that they had St. Mark's body, and his bones were in Alexandria. So they actually snuck to Alexandria sometime in the 14th century, so right at the beginning of the Renaissance. And they were able to take his bones, they hid them into pig carcasses, and then ship the pigs across the Mediterranean to Italy. The reason why that was a pretty safe bet is that for many of the faiths there, including but to no way limited, Judaism and Islam, um, pigs, pork is haram. It's something you don't touch. And so the agents of the papacy were able to smuggle the bones of St. Mark into Italy. Well, this is a painting of St. Mark preaching in Alexandria. He was there, and he was probably preaching at about, I'm going to say 50 to 60 AD, right around that time. There are some things that we see in here that show the cross-pollination of these cultures without being in any way actually historical. So this is supposed to be Alexandria. It's Egypt. So you have this right here, this obelisk. We have this kind of, it's called an architectural fantasy. It's a building that didn't ever exist, but it's designed to look like it has elements of Roman architecture, to kind of put it into a place of respectability and remind you of the Catholic connection to the Empire of Rome. We have a giraffe here. Now, the giraffe, what do you think the giraffe is there for symbolically? And to answer that, you're going to have to look back at our very first talk together when we were saying, can you read Renaissance? The giraffe forms this exact same purpose as the date palms and turbaned characters did behind Mary with the really odd, angry little man, old man, baby Jesus. Do you remember that painting?
Yes, I do. That was an interesting one. So, and if I remember right, it's to show a sort of fantastical worldliness to the environment.
Well, it's that is a big part of it, and another really main part is to place the story.
Mhm.
So now of course people did not wear turbans looking like that in Jerusalem where Mary was, but that reminded viewers of the Middle East, north, that area. And so having a giraffe here, it doesn't have anything to do with anything going on in the painting, but if people are familiar with giraffes, they would recognize, they come from Africa.
Mhm.
So this helps to place this in northern Egypt, on the continent. Now we look at these. Do you recognize what kind of outfits these guys are wearing?
Yeah, those are interesting. I can't say I've seen something familiar to that to place to a certain place in the world, though.
This is really very similar to the Eastern Orthodox stuff. When
Mm.
Catholicism kind of moved with, or the portion of Catholicism that went with Constantine to Turkey, for a while there were several different popes. I think at one time there were 3 different popes, and they all excommunicated each other. And that is marks when the Orthodox Christianity that was centered around Constantine and in Turkey broke away from the Catholic Orthodoxy. And they developed a lot of symbols of their own symbols to kind of parallel what the Catholics were doing and became their own thing. And this is very much like the kind of priestly garb they would wear. But it also reminds me quite a bit of traditional Jewish garb that was quite a bit earlier. But anyway, so we do have, and they're all sitting listening to St. Mark because they're all good Christians, even though they're not Catholic. But what you notice is all of these guys back here standing behind Mark, and of course they were all born well over 1,000 years later. But the guy who painted this was not a dumbass. He knew that the people paying his paycheck were these guys. And actually, there has been a couple people who have written papers about it. It looks very much like several of these people in the crowd are among the families that helped to pay for this painting. You know, they are actually contemporary portraits that are contemporary to the artist who did this. So he's saying, yeah, even though these are Christians and these are Christians, these guys are all standing up and these guys are kneeling down. So that tells you a little bit that the artist is saying, yeah, these guys are better. And then we also have Muslims here and Muslims here, and with uh, two different groups of Muslims. These are very much Turkish, and these are more from the Arabian Peninsula. And then we also have people. These are Muslims as well, but these are more Iranian. So, and, you know, and all these guys, they're further away. They're standing up too, but they're further away. And you can kind of see that there's this hierarchy where St. Mark is right here. The guys that paid for the painting are standing right behind him. The guys that they want to make friends with kind of are all in different groups around them. But the closest ones are the Christians because they're just slightly better than the Muslims. And of course, I am totally talking foot and mouth, but and I am being kind of sarcastic, but you can tell that the artist is drawing together a lot of different cultures. And if you traveled 3,000 miles to see this painting and you were from Turkey, the first thing you'd notice is, hey, I'm being represented here. My people are here. And then the other stuff um, is more subtle. And it's a fantastic painting, but it draws from the cultures that the Mughals interacted with, the Ottomans directly, you know, right here and here, as well as the Europeans. And so, you know, this very definitely a or at least an attempt to cross pollinate cultures altogether. Now, there are some other things I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to watch a couple of videos with you guys first, and these videos will also be in the attendance for anybody who's not here live. And I want you, and if it doesn't show up in the recording, definitely watch them. But we're going to try to see if we can get these videos to show up in the recording. And they're just 3 rather short videos, but they're talking about what art means, what art is, and I think it's important as we move closer and, you know, more thoroughly through all this stuff. I think it helps us to give a solid grounding of vocabulary. You know, what are the principles that we're going to be talking about as we look at art from all these different cultures? And for the discussion today, I think these are particularly important. So there are 3 videos. One is 2 minutes long, one is 4 minutes long, and one is 6 minutes long. So 12 minutes of videos. So first off, can you guys see this? It says, "What is art?"
Yeah, that's looking good.
Okay. I'm going to play for just the first couple seconds. Please tell me if you can hear it.
Art. When we hear that word, some of our
Can you hear it?
Yeah, sounds good so far.
Okay.
minds jump to
Sorry about
museums or
Oh,
frame.
sigh. I'm trying to get it paused and start it over again. Okay. Here we go. When we talk about what art is, I do have a definition that I think is a functional definition. Um, Notice I haven't started the video. I'm just blabbing myself. I believe that art is either the process or the evidence of the process of creation when a person is making something new, drawing from something beyond their immediate ego-driven perspective. So this, you know, an ego-driven perspective is what's going to help me now? What am I hungry for at this moment? How am I going to react at this second? That's ego-driven. When you step outside of that, you start looking for things like inspiration, your subconscious self, spirituality. What is the universe wanting me to do? Am I listening to the medium? Am I listening to the room? Those kinds of things are the things that I'm talking about. When we allow that to influence our creative process, that action or the evidence of that action becomes art. And so if you are teaching a kindergarten class, if you are working the floor as a nurse, if you are welding, it doesn't matter. All of those things, when you are paying attention so closely that you slip into that flow state, when you are stepping outside of your immediate ego-driven self, you are creating something new, and that process or the evidence of that process becomes art. So that's my definition. And that also means that every individual, if they choose to, becomes an artist. That doesn't mean everybody can be a fantastic painter. That's not what I'm talking about. But if your training leads you to be a host, for example, on a cruise ship, the artistry comes in because you are reading the room. You are listening to the people around you. You are asking yourself constantly, what's going to be the best thing for this customer and this guest? And you are going to be doing stuff way ahead of people that are in it just for the paycheck. And then it becomes art. And I use that example because I made a friend with a gentleman who's a legacy martial arts master in Bali, who for 3 months every year, he and his wife work cruise ships. And they make enough money on those 3 months every year to support both of their families. And by families, I mean uncles, aunts, grandparents, everybody. So anyway, but he and his wife were real artists on that cruise ship. Anyway, okay, so we're going to watch this.
Art. When we hear that word, some of our minds jump to museums or framed paintings, and in that context, some people think, nah, I'm not a big fan of art, I just don't get it. Or they think of art as something that's just for intellectuals or artsy people. But really, art is for anyone who wants to experience it, and it's often in more places than we might realize. Songs you like, movies you watch, poems, theater, even a quilt that your grandmother made. All of that and more is art. So you might be wondering, well, then what is art? How do I define it? Well, that's tough. Art's been around for thousands of years, and through the ages it's evolved in a number of different ways. And the reasons for creating it vary from person to person depending on any number of factors. So defining art is pretty tricky, and it's something that's been debated throughout history. There just isn't one agreed upon definition. However, many believe that art is anything that stirs emotion in you. Now, the emotions that get stirred up depend entirely on your own history, your story, everything that comes together to make up who you are. And because of this, 3 different people can experience the same piece of art and have wildly different reactions to it. One person might think it's the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, the second person might hate it, and the third might not feel much of anything at all. And none of them would be wrong. Everyone's entitled to their own preferences and feelings when it comes to art. You know, the way you feel about your favorite song could be the same way that someone else feels about their favorite sculpture. And even though you might not like that sculpture, it can be valuable to consider why that person enjoys it so much. You may learn something about them and maybe even yourself. The term art is really just a label. Over the years, a lot of people have tried to classify what it is or what it isn't, but that's not really what art is about. It's about your personal experience with it and the meaning that you draw from it. Everyone reacts to art differently and has the potential to grow and learn from it. It gives us the opportunity to tell stories, record history, and tap into our emotions in a way that few other things can.
So I really like that. That's the shortest of the videos we're going to look at. I like that because it talks about art through some of the purposes that art has. One of the things that is kind of sad to me is all of us have this propensity, it seems, or most of us do. When you hear the word art, we are usually thinking about great big paintings of some sort, which are grandiose expressions of something we don't understand, or are things that are completely incomprehensible. And I like that short video because it talks about, art is a lot more than that. And all of us have a favorite movie. All of us have favorite clothes. And there are things like that that are also art that somebody who is in an elitist frame of mind would not accept. Now, this one, we're going to be talking about the meaning of art. I don't know if you guys remember a while ago, we talked about Plato's allegory of the cave and what the real means, or the ideal. And this is something similar to that, but we're talking about who decides what the art means. And my opinion is, just as that other video talks about, your relationship to the art is going to vary with who you are as an individual. And I think that this goes in a large part to where we decide that art has meaning too. So if somebody could tell me if you can hear this. Can you hear the music and see this? Who decides what art means?
Decide what art means, you mean? Like just, I think.
No, I mean, can you see this screen?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is still going
Okay.
well. It's really crazy. It's completely different than how it has been in the past. Really clear audio and visual wise.
All right, excellent. Okay, we're going to go ahead and watch this, and then I'll have a third video too to share.
Imagine you and a friend are strolling through an art exhibit and a striking painting catches your eye. The vibrant red appears to you as a symbol of love, but your friend is convinced it's a symbol of war. And where you see stars in a romantic sky, your friend interprets global warming inducing pollutants. To settle the debate, you turn to the internet, where you read that the painting is a replica of the artist's first grade art project. Red was her favourite colour, and the silver dots are fairies. You now know the exact intentions that led to the creation of this work. Are you wrong to have enjoyed it as something that the artist didn't intend? Do you enjoy it less now that you know the truth? Just how much did the artist's intention affect your interpretation of the painting? It's a question that's been tossed around by philosophers and art critics for decades, with no consensus in sight. In the mid-20th century, literary critic W.K. Wimsatt and philosopher Monroe Beardsley argued that artistic intention was irrelevant. They called this the intentional fallacy, the belief that valuing an artist's intentions was misguided. Their argument was twofold. First, the artists we study are no longer living, never recorded their intentions, or are simply unavailable to answer questions about their work. Second, even if there were a bounty of relevant information, Wimsatt and Beardsley believed that it would distract us from the qualities of the work itself. They compared art to a dessert. When you taste a pudding, the chef's intentions don't affect whether you enjoy its flavour or texture. All that matters, they said, is that the pudding works. Of course, what works for one person might not work for another. And since different interpretations appeal to different people, the silver dots in our painting could be reasonably interpreted as fairies, stars, or pollutants. By Wimsatt and Beardsley's logic, the artist's interpretation of her own work would just be one among many equally acceptable possibilities. If you find this problematic, you might be more in line with Stephen Knapp and Walter Ben Michaels, two literary theorists who rejected the intentional fallacy. They argued that an artist's intended meaning was not just one possible interpretation, but the only possible interpretation. For example, suppose you're walking along a beach and come across a series of marks in the sand that spell out a verse of poetry. Knapp and Michaels believed the poem would lose all meaning if you discovered these marks were not the work of a human being, but an odd coincidence produced by the waves. They believed an intentional creator is what makes the poem subject to understanding at all. Other thinkers advocate for a middle ground, suggesting that intention is just one piece in a larger puzzle. Contemporary philosopher Noel Carroll took this stance, arguing that an artist's intentions are relevant to their audience the same way a speaker's intentions are relevant to the person they're engaging in conversation. To understand how intentions function in conversation, Carol said to imagine someone holding a cigarette and asking for a match. You respond by handing them a lighter, gathering that their motivation is to light their cigarette. The words they use to ask the question are important, but the intentions behind the question dictate your understanding and ultimately your response. So which end of this spectrum do you lean towards? Do you, like Wimsett and Beardsley, believe that when it comes to art, the proof should be in the pudding? Or do you think that an artist's plans and motivations for their work affect its meaning? Artistic interpretation is a complex web that will probably never offer a definitive answer. Did you know that TED-Ed has a program dedicated to sharing?
I really like that kind of conversation. And one of the reasons why I like that conversation is art is something that the meaning lies somewhere in that whole cloud of possibilities. And I don't think I really believe that it's going to be very difficult for anything, any example of art to only have one meaning. It's going to vary with what people bring to it, as well as what state it's in, what the physical context of it is, as who made it, what the culture is that produced it. All those kinds of things go into helping to make meaning. There's a gentleman named Ibn Khaldun. He's a 13th century Muslim philosopher. He's considered the fairy godfather of modern sociology, a lot of soft sciences, museology, things like that. One of the things he said that I really like was none of us live on an island. All of us live in a river where we are surrounded by water. And that water is the impact that we have on people around us, before us and after us, as well as the impact of everybody else that we can possibly interact with, that are our ancestors as well as our offspring. All of that together pushes against us, even as we push against that. All of us are interacting. I love that kind of imagery. He calls it living in a river of ghosts. But one of the things he also said, and keep in mind this is 700 years ago, he said that objects have specific meaning in the context for which they are intended, and that meaning changes when the context changes. So, for example, you find baby shoes in the wall of a pioneer house. You're going in the cellar and you find their old well that was stopped up, and there's a little hole in the wall, and there's a pair of baby shoes. And you turn around and donate that to the museum at the university. Well, first off, those baby shoes have one very specific context for the person who made them. That person was making a living, and a family bought them. And then it has a context for the family. This is something that the baby wears. This is something that the baby uses. If they're really nice shoes, they are also an opportunity for the family to remind the child and those around the child that the child is valued and is an important member of the family. They're loved. Then one of the pioneer traditions, and this was actually common to a lot of people living in throughout Europe and the Americas, is that when you would build a house, one of the ways to bless the house, making sure that it was going to be a shelter for family, and also as a static prayer asking for abundance, you would take baby shoes, usually used baby shoes, and brick them up into the basement or the root cellar. And it was just a way of, those shoes are in there to remind God that you are asking for abundance and health in your family. So that's another meaning. And then if you bought this old house and you find them, it's kind of startling. You have no idea what it means, but it becomes a curio to you, and you want to donate it to the museum, and then donate to the university. They put it on display, and somebody else will see that and start imagining, what were people like who wore those shoes? Why were they found in the house? And people have a different experience there. So in each of these settings, the meaning of that art or those shoes is completely different. And that a lot of it depends on the person who made it definitely has some input to that, but also each of the contexts has input, and the people that view it differently each have input. And all of us, there isn't a correct answer as to what those things mean, but being aware of the different kinds of context, the different semiotics involved, the different ways that people view it, how the culture might have intended it. All those things together can help us to appreciate deeper levels of that meaning. I know that was kind of long-winded, but does that make sense to everybody?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very well put. It just this conversation becomes so interesting, especially when we apply it to now the technology that we're being able to create. That like technology that can literally just create art on its own and it removes the human element. I don't know. The conversation of what it is just so much. You know, there's just so much to dive into.
Well, and that's a really fantastic conversation just by itself, and we'll dive into it actually towards the right at the end of the semester too.
Mhm.
But this idea of generating art with only prompting from the human, uh, and even generating art or self-generating art. Well, where does the art come in? And my argument would be that we have to take into account the culture that produced computers, the history behind those computers that developed that, who's programming it, and the databases that are drawn from for the computer to know what choices to make or to generate a hierarchy of choices and to begin to create something. So even though the human hands are removed potentially by many steps, there is still an element in there of potential meaning as art because it still represents an artifact that comes about as a result of people's intention to create, even though it's several steps removed. And that process of removal, I think, even makes for some really interesting conversations too.
Mhm.
Now, I do want to share this. I didn't share it in my last class, but I thought you guys might appreciate it. Um, can you see this? It says The Guardian right here, and the title of it is "What is Art For?"
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do this. This is a little bit longer video, but I think it is very important too. And then we'll go back to the stuff for the module as well.
You might think there was a simple answer to this. After all, we know how to say what most things are for, like this or that. And people flock to museums like never before, so they must have their motives. But when it comes to art, people get strangely afraid to ask too directly what it might all be for. Because, well, everyone except you might know the answer already. It's perhaps too obvious, it's perhaps too complicated. The result is an awkward silence and a lot of confusion. But maybe it shouldn't be that hard to say what art is for. Maybe we can have a go at ascribing certain rather clear purposes to art. Here's 5 things that art might be able to do for us. It's an obvious but striking fact that the most popular works of art in the world show pretty things. Happy people, flowers in spring, blue skies. This is the top-selling postcard in the world from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. This enthusiasm for prettiness worries serious types a lot. They wonder, have people forgotten what life's really like? But that seems a misplaced worry. We need pretty things close to us, not because we're in danger of forgetting the bad stuff, but because terrible problems weigh so heavily on us that we're in danger of slipping into despair and depression. That's why prettiness matters. It's an emblem of hope, which is an achievement. Prettiness, those flowers and blue skies and kids in meadows, is hope bottled and preserved, waiting for us when we need it. The world often requires us to put on a cheerful facade, but beneath the surface there's a lot of sadness and regret that we can't express from fear of seeming weird or a loser. One thing art can do is reassure us of the normality of pain. It can be sad with and for us. Some of the world's greatest works of art have been loved for their capacity to make the pain that's inside all of us more publicly visible and available. Like putting on a sad piece of music, somber works of art don't have to depress us. Rather, they can give us the welcome feeling that pain is part of the human condition. Art fights the false optimism of commercial society. It's there to remind us, with dignity, that every good life has extraordinary amounts of confusion, suffering, loneliness, and distress within it, and that therefore we should never aggravate sadness by feeling we must be freakish simply for experiencing it quite a lot. All of us are a little unbalanced in some way. We're too intellectual or too emotional, too masculine or too feminine, too calm or too excitable. The art we love is frequently something we're drawn to because it compensates us for what we lack. It counterbalances us. When we're moved by a work of art, it may be because it contains concentrated doses of qualities we need more of in our lives. Perhaps it's full of the serenity we admire but don't have enough of. Perhaps it's got the tenderness we long for, but that our jobs and relationships are currently lacking. Or perhaps it's suffused with a pain and drama we've had to stifle but want to get in touch with. Sometimes a whole society falls in love with a certain style in art because it's trying to rebalance itself, like France in the late 18th century that wanted David as a corrective to its decadence, or Britain in the 19th century that looked to the pre-Raphaelites to counter the effects of brutal industrialization. The art a country or a person calls beautiful gives you vital clues as to what's missing in them. It's in the power of art to help us be more rounded, more balanced, and more sane. The media is constantly giving us hints about what's glamorous and important. Art also tells us about what's glamorous and important, but fortunately, given that you weren't invited again to the Oscars this year, it usually picks on some very different things. Albrecht Dürer makes grass look glamorous. John Constable draws our attention to the skies. Van Gogh reminds us that oranges are worth paying attention to. Marcel Duchamp challenges us to look again at the seemingly mundane. These artists aren't falsely glamorizing things that are better ignored. They're justly teasing out a value that's been neglected by a world with a deeply distorted and unfair sense of what truly matters. Art returns glamour to its rightful place, highlighting what's genuinely worth appreciating. Nothing seems further from good art than propaganda, the sort encouraging you to fight or what government to support. But one way to think about art is that it is a sort of propaganda, in the sense of a tool that motivates and energizes you for a cause. Only it's propaganda on behalf of some of the most important and nicest emotions and attitudes in the world, which it uses its skills to make newly appealing and accessible. It might be propaganda about the simple life, or about the need to broaden one's horizons, or about a more playful, tender approach to life. It's a force that stands up for the best sides of human nature and gives them a platform and an authority in a noisy, distracted world. For too long, art's attracted a little too much reverence and mystique for its own good. In its presence, we're like someone meeting a very famous person. We get stiff and lose our spontaneity. We should relax around it as we already do with music and learn to use it for what it's really meant for, as a constant source of support and encouragement for our better selves.
It's the most idiotic thing.
I really like that video quite a bit, and it's something that I think is really important to remind ourselves of as we move forward with the classes that we take. You know, particularly with this class that we're talking about. Art history can be so stuffy and so self-referential and so hoity-toity. And I think sometimes it's important just to remember that sometimes a painting like this is an important painting because in addition to what it means, it's also just nice to look at. You know, I love this area right here. This is, whenever I see this, I am thinking of Lord of the Rings. It represents something that would be so fun to visit. And I think that So, as we go through the different things that we look at moving forward, keep that in mind, because there is going to be some stuff that is very difficult to look at. And there's going to be stuff that is very uncomfortable. But it is important to remember that sometimes the good things about art aren't necessarily the things that are the pretty things about art too. Just to think of. Now, I do have some videos here if you want to. There's Renaissance, Istanbul, Ottoman architecture, different things like that. These are things we've already looked at, but it might be good to go and watch them double speed to remind you of what we already talked about. Then I'm also talking about, I like this video because it talks quite a bit about the very real world connections between Venice and the Ottoman Empire. I did mention that there's evidence of that here. These turbans on the far right are very Turkish Muslim turbans, and these are very Eastern Orthodox Christian outfits. And so, these people very much knew of each other and dealt with each other all the time. And this talks very much about the connections between the two. Now, one thing that I think demonstrates this cross-pollination is geometry. And this is really fun to look at if you're a complete and total nerd. But some of the things that I wanted to talk about is, we mentioned in the Mughal architecture, the city of heaven, the diagram of the city of heaven, and how that's related to the footprint of the Taj Mahal. That diagram, this kind of geometry, is something that is consistent to all of these cultures. All of them used it. And we can see that if you guys want, I will talk about orthogons and how they kind of describe placement of elements on a canvas. And we can really see how that relates to miniature painting in the Mughals, the comic book type painting, as well as the kinds of things that the Ottomans did, as well as very much the Renaissance kind of stuff. We can see these geometries all around. Now, why this kind of stuff is important is, if you can imagine all these people coming home from the Crusades, just a couple 100 years before this, they had seen the tallest building in the entire world, the Hagia Sophia. They had interacted with art and design that they had never dreamed was possible. It made the Viking stuff and the Scandinavian stuff look almost lazy by how complicated it was. These were people that came back with math in their heads and possibilities in their heads. And that's how we get this incredible growth during the Renaissance. Peaceful cohabitation where people have an opportunity to actually express what they learned. And then I think you can see a lot of that with the Ottomans and the Mughals as well. You have the same kind. There's a lot of parallels in the structures of those societies. And one of those things that was common was this very strong growing awareness of math and geometry. Now, the outcomes did not look the same. Gothic architecture did not look like Ottoman architecture, but they're both based on the principle, how can I get the tallest spire that I can? How can I get the biggest building? And you see, after the return from the Crusades in this time period, we see a growth of architecture where people go from 2 and 3 level structures, that's all anybody's ever built for thousands of years, to all of a sudden they're creating things that look like they could literally touch the clouds. And I think that they did that because they saw what other people were doing and they wanted to recreate some of that effect. We're not going to watch this. I do recommend that you watch this video, The Complex Geometry of Islamic Design. Eric Brugge is another friend of mine who does some really amazing stuff. And he's the one that designed this. It's not his voice, but it talks about this kind of geometry. And it's some of the geometry that we are looking at. And all of this geometry can be done with just a ruler and a compass. And that's all you need. You don't need anything else. And so I definitely recommend going through and watching this video. We're not going to, and then we also go all the way from that time up to 19th century and MC Escher and math and contemporary mathematics. Like, definitely watch that. And then this is this next article I want to show you, the one that that you saw me click on. What I love about this is this shows that City of Heaven diagram that I keep mentioning in reference to the Taj Mahal and how people created it. And in this diagram, you can see some of the other things that we've been looking at. Like if you make a circle from right here all the way around, that circle is going to have the same circumference as the perimeter of the square defined by these 4 points. And why is that important? I know that you're asking for that answer. You see the same relationship right here. This is that circle, this is that square. This kind of ratio where the square is directly connected to the circle by having the same distance on the outside perimeter, that same measurement, is very difficult to get to unless you're really good at math. And it demonstrates a cultural complexity that is pretty profound. So that's what this is. If you guys want to do this as one of your projects, I definitely recommend it. And this demonstrates all the geometry involved. And as we look at that, I hope you can see some of the other geometry that we've seen in some of this other architecture. And there's some very, very, very cool stuff that starts developing. So if anybody is interested in doing that as a discovery project, again, it's right down here, right there. And you can tie it into the class by saying, hey, the teacher talked about this. It's related to the footprint of the Taj Mahal. We looked at the Taj Mahal. Now I want to make this diagram as my discovery project. That'd be fine. I did want to talk a little bit about geometry construction. And again, why is this important? This is the Kismati pavement is what every head of state in England has been crowned on since the end of the Crusades. This was given as a gift to the ruling house of England at the end of the last crusade. And you look at a lot of these elements in it, and I'm just going to tap on this and we'll go over and the elements that we see in this, there's a lot of geometry here. And I hope that you can see some of the things from each of the cultures that we've looked at. Now, this predates this course. This is just right before the beginning of the Renaissance. But I hope you can see the impact of this design on other stuff we've seen. Like there are elements in here that remind me very much of the Mughals. There are elements in here that remind me very much of the Ottomans, like right through here. And there's a lot of stuff in here that remind us very much of what we saw in Europe for the Renaissance and those kinds of periods. Because this is the kind of thing that informed all three cultures, this kind of geometry. A friend of mine she is one of the principal teachers at the King's School of Traditional Arts in Wales. And she actually took the time to walk me through some of this geometry. And I was able to replicate it with, like I said, just a compass and a straight edge. When you look at this, and the easiest way to do it, of course, would be computers. Because it was generated by human beings over about 800 years ago. This is an example of geometry that is consistent among all the art that we see. And you can see evidence of this being used in the oldest man-made items on the planet, the 1.8 million year old tools that were found in northern China that were made by people that looked like us. Almost 2 million years old. and they were aware of these forms. And you also get the architecture that some people have claimed was 2 million years old. It might be only about 200,000 years old. Architecture in South Africa called Adam's Calendar, if you want to look that up. Very interesting. Also very aware of this. This is called the golden ratio or golden section. And I think we did talk about this a little bit. You get to it by making a perfect square, finding the center point of one edge of the square, getting the diagonal, and then swinging the diagonal down to get a rectangle. And this might seem kind of haphazard, but what's interesting about this, it's a little bit bigger than 1.5 times the size of the square. It's just a little bit bigger. But what's interesting about this shape has informed human construction since the beginning of the time that humans were humans. This Kepler was a scientist during the Renaissance who also was able to show that this has specific relations to how celestial bodies interact with each other. I think Kepler was later. I think he was more Baroque. This Da Vinci used this to define human proportions in a lot of his paintings. Praxiteles was a Greek sculptor that was a Pythagorean, and he used this to inform how he made his sculptures. This is what, if when a baby first opens its eyes, if it has the use of its eyes, the first time it sees its mother, it will respond to a mother's smile when her smile bears these proportions. And human beings, we do not fall in this exactly, but if you take the average of every human being and take their measurements of their bodies, the proportions of things like the width of our hand to the length of our hand, the length of one, like the end of our finger to the next joint of our finger, the ratio of fingertip to elbow to how long our arm is, these kinds of things bear very strong resemblance to this ratio. Have you guys ever heard of somebody called Fibonacci?
Yeah, the relating to the Fibonacci sequence, right?
Yes, exactly. The Fibonacci sequence is the sequence that Fibonacci, a mathematician, observed that plants seem to branch at. Seeds seem to spiral at. Petals seem to grow at. The ratio of the petals. All these things are based on a sequence of numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, where each successive number is the sum of the previous two. And the further out you get, the ratio of those numbers next to each other is closer and closer to an exact approximation of the golden ratio, which I think is fantastic. And then in the 1980s, believe it or not, so what's that, 40 years ago, one of the fathers of nuclear physics, a guy named Dr. Winter, was able to show that the different orders of elements in the periodic table of the elements, the orders are placed with specific numbers to them, and that's how many electrons are active to engage with other atoms. That's how it defines how molecules are shaped, and those are based on a direct consequence of the electrons. I'm sorry, the atoms relationship with golden ratio proportions. And it's actually based on platonic solids. Each of the 5 platonic solids are golden ratio structures that have a specific number of apexes or corners, and those shapes inform how atoms connect to each other to make molecules. And what's really maybe that's all coincidence, but what's really fascinating is you look at a DNA strand down the core of it, and the DNA strand, the visuals of a DNA strand are a perfect 5-point pentagram that is based on the golden ratio. Exactly. When it might be observer bias, but what's wild to me is that it goes from chemical reactions are defined by the shapes of the molecules within them, and those molecules are defined, their forms are defined by the golden ratio. Go out to mega clusters, superclusters of galaxies, and how they interact with each other are formed. NASA is discovering this as their mapping of our universe is expanding. Galaxies relate to each other and form into these mega clusters of galaxies as they fall on portions of these platonic solids that are huge three-dimensional depictions of the golden ratio. So the smallest thing, atoms, all the way to the largest things, mega clusters of galaxies, can be defined by their relationship to golden ratios. And this is something that every culture on the planet uses in everything that they produce. It doesn't matter the technical skill level. Everything from the shape of your cell phone and your watch face, where items are on your watch face, to the kind of glasses you like to wear on your face are based on golden ratio proportions. So I just want to, we don't have a lot of time to look at the rest of this stuff, but these are the things that I wanted to point out that we can specifically see among these three cultures in very obvious use, and how these cultures connect, I think. And now there's a really good chance they even may have influenced each other with this. Now, I saw many of these in the National Iranian Museum in Tehran. There's a lot of these beautiful things. This was a pretty standard decorative device for a lot of Muslim architecture from about the 8th century to about the middle of the 12th century. And then in different iterations beyond that. But this is an octagonal star, an 8-pointed star, and a cross fitting together in tiles. And you'll see this in Italian floors, several of and as well as Northern European things. You'll see these tiles in similar shape to this in a lot of Arnolfini's. I'm sorry, in a lot of who's the guy who painted Arnolfini's wedding? He also painted the girl with the pearl earring. Northern European Renaissance Dutch painter. You see in some of the paintings that he did a lot of these kinds of tiles because they were considered incredibly beautiful. And this style of geometric tiling for a lot of woodworkers in Europe, throughout Europe, but you also see it in a lot of the tiling and decorative work in India. And this particular stuff comes from Persia, and you see its influence in the Ottoman Empire as well. And then this is a 10-pointed star, and it's based on pentagonal geometry. This is something that is the golden section folded in on itself is what makes this kind of shape. And if you guys are interested, I will show you how to do this with just a compass and a straight edge, even though you're not supposed to be able to, just because of the math involved. Then we have a 6-pointed star. And I'm showing a lot of examples of Islamic stuff, but this is also stuff that shows up in churches throughout Italy and all through Europe. I don't know if you guys remember the Angels and Demons or Da Vinci Code, those movies. Rosslyn Chapel is a chapel that is a very Christian chapel built in England, but it has a lot of geometry based on these things, same kind of stuff. And then as we go to more science and alchemy and medical stuff, we start looking at things like 7-pointed stars. And all these things, these are all functional geometry used in art and in building that carries meaning beyond just its use in something. And then, of course, going back to the heavenly city diagram. And one thing I like about the heavenly city diagram is that it combines a lot of this stuff. It combines the 7-pointed star, 8-pointed star, the 6-pointed star as well. It combines a lot of these things, and it also has 12. It combines all this kind of geometry. And if we overlay, if you take this and let's see if I can find a footprint of the Taj Mahal. Oh, that kind of is irritating. I put in footprint of the Taj Mahal, and what I'm being shown is, of course, images of people stepping. So I'm trying to find a diagram, and then we'll get right back to it. That did not help. Okay. Oh yes, okay. Here's an image I wanted to show. Okay, here's an image of the Taj Mahal, and I know I've shown you this kind of thing before, where you see it laid out in the Persian garden and the fort and all that kind of stuff. But here is the plan of the interior of the Taj Mahal. And I want you to look at that and think about all these different things going on. That it has 8 sides. It has all this other stuff going on within those sides. These are placed in specific places. Very strong vertical, very strong horizontal. And then trying to go back to here we go, this diagram. What is fascinating to me is you lay this over the Taj Mahal diagram, and there is an awful lot of stuff going on. We can see a lot of the relationships. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, I believe so.
And then we can put in the Kismati pavement as well. We see there's a lot of stuff going on in there too. And these are not direct one for one. They don't lay over exactly on each other, but it's just fascinating to me how much is going on. And it looks to me that there is very much a strong relationship there. And that's that's the point of all this discussion is these folks were drawing from pretty much the same well. I did talk specifically about Rembrandt referencing very specific Mughal pages, comic book pages, and so that we see direct, powerful evidence that they were connected. But I think this is something that is intriguing to me because as we push forward with the art, we can see that people are interacting with each other, and maybe not directly, but there is a certain element of interaction where they are aware of each other. They know about each other. They are using each other's information and intelligence to help them. And I think that is really very fascinating, very interesting. And I want to just point out again that square and circle kind of thing that what's his name? Leonardo da Vinci had been using as well. Well, that was pretty much the whole point of today's lecture, just looking at all of that. And I'm wondering, what are your guys' thoughts about this? I haven't given you a chain of custody to validate or prove that so-and-so from the Ottoman Empire traveled to Italy and taught classes there. However, In the module, I do link you to a video where it does talk about several Italians being sent to train in Turkey. And we've already talked about Rembrandt connecting with friends who gave him pages from the Mughals. And there's even evidence to demonstrate that he probably went there like 2 or 3 times. And so we do know there was a lot of interconnection. But do you guys get a sense that a sense of feeling that there is this connection that is being demonstrated in some of the artwork and things that we're seeing?
Oh yeah, I there's this really interesting thing said by Neil deGrasse Tyson that while art in itself can be entirely unique to a person's ideas, scientific fact can be discovered through anyone, really. You know, so like EMC squared could have been discovered by anyone if Einstein wasn't born, but the creation of Adam would never have been created without Michelangelo. So it's really interesting to see that concept further explored in just this, and that we see a naturally occurring concept in geometry being executed in different spaces in different ways using different forms of it.
Yeah, I really like that. Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of my heroes. I really like a lot of this because he is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, like it or don't, I don't really care educator, and I really appreciate his perspective.
Mhm.
But would it surprise you to know, we talk about atomic theory and um, uh, nuclear physics and all this kind of stuff. Islam was brought to the world in 610. Baghdad was the seat of educational pursuit in in the world between North Africa and China. Baghdad was where it was at by the end of the 7th century. And by about 690, 695, right around that time, there was a scholar in Baghdad who said, if at any point, and he'd been studying atomic theory that the Greeks had generated, where and their idea of atomic theory was, and we are talking about Greeks 2,400 years ago, 4th century, 5th century BC, who said that the smallest particle of matter, they referred to as the atom, could not be divided. There was a particle of matter that could not be divided. And they said that was mirrored in the larger realm. So that, and at this time, so we're talking, 2,500 years ago, they were talking about that the earth revolved around the sun, and that the stars in the sky that you could see most likely had their own planets revolving around them too. So, this is all 2,500 years ago. So about 1,000 years later in Baghdad, this guy is saying, if we look at the atom as the smallest particle of matter, if we ever get to a point where we can divide it, I theorize that it will release enough energy in a moment that it would eclipse the sun. So we're talking about well over 1,000 years before the atom bomb, and they knew what they were talking about. That's the kind of stuff that I can't think is just mind-blowing to me. That these thinkers really understood this. And I should mention that it is a misnomer that everybody thought the earth was flat, until a certain point in time. Most people whose energies were not dependent on the ascendancy of a political church knew that the earth was round. Anybody who traveled anywhere understood that the earth was round, to the point where right around, I want to say 20 BC, there was a Greek mathematician who was able to measure, he was able to figure out the circumference of the earth from pole to pole around the equator to within 6 feet, which is about 50% better than satellite mapping technology today.
Yeah, the overlooked advancements or ideas of the past are really incredible to look into.
Yeah, it is absolutely astounding. And there's even the camera obscura, where have you ever used one of those? It's basically a pinhole camera where it reflects the outside image onto the inside of a room?
I haven't used one, but I do know what it is.
Okay. There, when Plato, again, 2600 years ago, is talking about the allegory of the cave, there are a number of photographers today who believe that he had access to the camera obscura technology, and that's what he was referencing. And people do know that they used it during the Renaissance. There are surviving camera obscura devices that are 1,000 years old. So, people did this kind of stuff all the time. And I think that is just amazing. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff I wanted to talk about today. And so the module is basically just a recap of the really groovy, cool stuff we've gone over the last couple months. And the message is, I want to impress on everybody, our ancestors knew about each other, and they interacted with each other, and they interacted with each other a lot. There aren't always historical records to undeniably prove their interaction at all points, but I think we can see evidence, at least a glimmer of some of that interaction in some of the art that survives. And it's not always going to be through historical channels, but when the Europeans come up with the lute that is derived from the Arabic al-ud, which is a description of the instrument that looks eerily similar to the lute, and it just happens to show up right after the Crusades. I think there's pretty strong evidence or validation to show that these guys knew of each other, and were influenced by each other. So anyway, I think that's pretty cool. Well, any last observations before we part ways?
I think I'm all right. Thank you so much for hosting class.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Spencer. I'm very glad that you're here, and I appreciate your energy. I'm really glad that you interact so much. Thank you very much.
Of course, have a great time.
And Colton, I'm glad that you're here too. Thank you very much for being here. Well, guys, everybody, I hope you all have a wonderful week and weekend. And if anybody has any concerns about the projects and stuff like that, I know they haven't all been turned in and stuff like that, and that's totally fine. Please keep me in the loop of how you're progressing and how you're doing. Please let me know if you have any issues, and know that any assignment, if you do not get a perfect score, you can always look at the comments that I make, find out what I'm saying, and make the changes and resubmit. That's how you learn. That's how you get better, and that's how you get a better grade. So, and I'm happy. The record, I think, so far is 6 resubmissions, and that person ended up getting a perfect score on their project. So, all right, guys, you have a good week and weekend, and I will look forward to seeing y'all on Tuesday.
You too. We'll see you then.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.